Hello chess fans and welcome to Chess Vibe, and today we are going to discuss the best reply against 1d4. This topic was in highly demand, so I decided to make the video on it. So the video is going to be in three parts. First, I'm going to tell you all about the theories, and the second, I'm going to tell you about some traps that I'm going to show you in the opening, and third, I'm going to show you one of the best games played in the line. I'm going to show you. So you would get the inspiration of playing the line I'm going to recommend you. Okay, so till then, stay tuned. Keep watching Chess Fights. So let's first talk about the first topic, the theory. So there are many lines after 1d4. There are many lines. Black can play knight f6, black can play e6, black can play d5, black can even play c6, stuff like that. He can play g6, he can play b6. There are a bunch of lines. Even c5 is also a line. So after d4, we are going to play knight to f6, the most common move. Yeah, because after knight f6, there are many options. So after knight f6, white usually plays c4, the queen's gambit. So after c4, black is actually having many options. He can play g6, he can play d5, he can play c5, he can play e6. But the move I'm going to recommend you is to play e5. And actually, after e5, this line is called the Budapest Gambit. And actually, this line is not so popular. That's why many people are not aware of it. So that's why you are having the already very nice advantage. If your opponent doesn't know the line, you are already having an advantage in the opening. So after e5, the most common move is to capture the pawn on e5. And now black is going to play knight to g4. Idea is very simple. Black wants to capture the pawn on e5. So white definitely tries to play knight f3, developing the piece and also protecting the pawn on e5. Black is going to play bishop to c5. And after knight f3, there are many moves for black which is equal. Black can play bishop c5, he can play knight c6, or he can even play d6. But the move I'm going to recommend you is to play bishop c5. Because after bishop c5, black is forced to play e3 in the position, because black is attacking the pawn on f2 with the knight and the bishop. e3 is forced, and after e3, black is going to develop the knight to c6. Yep, developing the third piece and also attacking the pawn on e5. So white can't do anything. He have to play knight to c3. He have to give the control of the pawn on e5. Even if your opponent tries to play something like queen d5, hitting the bishop, protecting the pawn, you can still play the move queen e7, protecting the bishop, and also you are hitting the pawn on e5 twice. So nothing is going to happen. Okay, so queen d5 is bad. White have to play knight f3, knight c3, and now you are going to simply castle in the position. There are two best moves. You can either capture the pawn on e5 or you can either castle. Both the moves are fine, but castle is actually much better because the pawn on e5 is going nowhere. You can capture it whenever you want. So after castle, white can play h3. Yeah, the most natural move in the position. Yeah, because the knight on g4 is actually very irritating for white. So white wants to remove the knight from the g4 square. We have h3, knight into e5, and now white simply plays bishop to e2. Yep, he wants to castle. So black is now going to simply capture the knight on f3 with a check, bishop into f3, knight e5, castle, knight into f3 check, queen into f3, rook e8, b3. And after rook e8, just look at the position. First of all, black is having the bishop pair, white is having the most irritating pair, bishop and the knight, which is actually a disadvantage in the end game. And the bishop pair is already an advantage for black. And if I talk about the pawn structure, black haven't moved the single pawn yet, so black is free to choose whatever the pawn structure black wants. Whereas white have already moved the pawn structure, so white is forced to play b3, going for this bad pawn structure, and white is forced to play bishop b2 and having a very nice advantage. So after rook e8, white will definitely try to play b3, having this a very nice bishop advantage. So black is confused what to do. So now you are going to play bishop d6, bishop b2, and now bishop to e5. So now white is no longer having an advantage, because whenever the knight moves from the c3 square, you are simply going to trade off the bishops. Okay. So after bishop e5, if white tries to play rook d1, you can play d6. And the idea is very simple. Black wants to play bishop d7 followed by bishop c6. First rook b8 because the pawn is hanging on b7. Rook b8, bishop d7 and bishop c6, and the bishop on c6 would be a deadly monster, attacking the queen and having this weaknesses on the g2 pawn. Okay, so this would be a very nice advantage for you already if your opponent doesn't know the line. Okay, so now let's move to the second variation. So after knight to g4, there are two moves, knight f3 and bishop f4. We have already discussed knight f3, so now let's discuss bishop to f4. After bishop f4, there are still many moves. Black can play bishop b4 check. He can play knight c6 or he can even play f6 in the position. But the best move I recommend you is to play bishop b4 check. Now white is having two options. He can play knight c3 or he can play knight d2. If he tries to play knight c3, simply capture the knight, b into c3, knight to c6, double attack, knight f3, queen e7, queen d5. Now it's a triple support of the pawn on e5. So black can no longer capture the pawn on e5. So now black is going to come up with a nice move, which is f6. And after f6, now black is actually trying to capture the pawn on e5. So definitely white will definitely capture the pawn on f6 because it's forced move. And after knight into f6, black is hitting the queen on d5. So after queen d3, black can play d6. And if you look at the position carefully, black is a pawn down, but white pawn structure is already bad, whereas black development rate is much higher than white. So black wants to simply castle. He wants to put the king on h8. The rook is open on f5, so definitely the bishop on f4 is already feeling pressure. And there could be some ideas to play bishop f5 hitting the queen. Yep, so in spite of being a pawn down, you're already having an advantage, okay? So this was the second variation, so now let's move to the third variation. So after bishop to b4 check, now let's discuss the move knight d2. After knight d2, black can play d6. And definitely white would capture the pawn on d6. If you don't want to sacrifice the pawn on d6, you can still play knight c6, but I must recommend you to play d6. Because after d6, you would be having a much nicer variation. After g6, definitely white would capture the pawn. And after bishop into d6, white is having two options. He can capture the bishop on d6 or he can go back with bishop to g3. Let's first discuss the move bishop into d6. Check. Bishop into d6. After bishop into d6, you are going to capture the bishop with the queen. And now we have e3 by white. White wants to play bishop e2. And now comes a very nice move, queen f6. Missed by white, definitely. And not an easy move to spot for white side. After queen f6, there are two threats. You are first threatening a checkmate in one, followed by queen f2 checkmate. And second threat is that you want to capture the b2 pawn and you want to even the materiality because you are already a pawn down. Okay, so now white is having two options. He can play knight f3 or he can even play knight h3. We are going to discuss both the options. So first, let's check out the move knight to h3. After knight h3, black is going to play queen into b2, bishop e2, knight to f6 because there was a double attack. We have castle by white, and now we have bishop into h3, g into h3, and after g into h3, just look at the position. White king is already weak because of the bad pawn structure, and yeah, black is simply going to play h5, rook h6, rook g6, game over for white. Okay, so that is why we can say that playing knight h3 is a bad idea. After on the move number 9. Okay, so at the place of playing knight h3, which is a bad move, let's discuss the move knight to f3. After knight f3, black is going to capture the pawn on b2. We have bishop e2, knight f6, castle, rook b1, queen into a2. And after queen into a2, just look at the position. Black is the pawn, but look at the materiality. Definitely look at the position and development. Definitely white is having an advantage because white pieces are much nicer placed compared to black. black pieces are just actually worse than white because the bishop on c8, the knight on d8, the rook on d8 is doing nothing. But you can simply develop the pieces like knight c6 followed by bishop g4, and even you can even sacrifice the pawn on b7. You are still equal because you are still having this a passed pawn, and you would be equal in the materiality. So there is nothing to worry. Just play on the move. Your idea is very simple. You want to play knight to c6, and you want to play bishop g4, or you can even play bishop f5. And if I talk about white position, I don't think white is having a nice plan. Yeah, white have able to develop everything, but there is no plan for white. So yeah, so this position is actually much better for black. Okay, so now we have discussed the move knight to f3. So now let's discuss the move. What will happen after bishop into d6 if white tries to play bishop to g3? After bishop g3, now black is going to play. There are two moves: bishop into g3, or black can even play queen f6. If you are a complicated player, definitely go for queen f6. Or even if you are, and if you are just a very solid player, yep, no more complications. A positional player, definitely capture the bishop. After bishop into g3, definitely h into g3 is the best move. F into g3 is already bad. H into g3, and now we have queen f6. Definitely a mate in one threat, and also attacking the pawn on b2. So after queen to f6, knight h3. It doesn't matter knight h3 or knight f3 because now both the moves are right. Okay, so after knight h3, it's simply protecting the pawn. Now black is simply going to castle. After castle, now there are two options. White can play e3 or white can play b3. Okay, now first we are going to discuss b3 because white knows that black is going to attack the pawn on b2. So white will first try to defend the pawn on b2 by playing b3. Okay, so after b3, now black is going to play. Congratulations first, because your opponent is already blundered and you're going to win the game. Because after b3, there comes a dangerous move, knight to c6, developing the piece. White is going to play e3, developing the piece. White wants to play bishop e2 and castle. Now you're going to play rook e8. Perhaps the sacrifice is going to come. Okay? So after rook e8, white is going to play bishop e2, simply developing the piece, a double attack on the knight. And now comes knight into e3. Boom. F into e3, bishop into h3 first. There are two options white can capture with the g pawn or with the rook. We are going to discuss both the options. So first, let's check out the rook into h3 variation. Rook into e3, knight to f3. So idea is very simple. White wants to run away with king f2. But white is too late because you have now rook e8, a double attack on the bishop. So even if king f2, rook into e2 check, queen into e2, rook into e2 check, king into f2, e2. Now we have queen into a1, just a rook plus, and completely winning position. And if we assume that we can't able to capture the rook on a1, but still the position is better for black because look at the king. White king is already very weak. Okay, so this was the variation. What will happen after rook into h3? What will happen after g to h3? Black is going to play rook to d8 now. White cannot move the knight because the queen is hanging. Even the pawn on e3 is hanging. Everything is hanging. So after rook d8, if white tries to play rook f1, hitting the queen, black is going to simply play queen c3. Idea is very simple. Black wants to capture the knight on d2. Queen cannot capture the rook because the rook is hanging on a1. So let's take rook b1. And now we have knight e5. Already over game. Game is already over. Black is going to play knight d3. White king cannot stop it actually because if white king tries to run away with king f2, black will simply capture the knight on d2 with the rook, and it's already game over for white. Okay, so this would be hanging. This would be happening if white tries to play b2 in the position, b3 in the position on the move number 10. So definitely b3 is a bad move. So white is forced to play e3, which is actually the best move and also the natural move. So after e3, black is going to play simply queen into b2, capturing the pawn. Knight to f4, definitely having an open fight. black is going to play h6. Bishop e2, knight f6, because there was a double attack. We have castle by white. Definitely, if castle, there are two moves we are going to discuss: castle and rook b1. If your opponent is an attacking player, definitely he won't castle. He would simply try to attack. And if your opponent is a positional player, definitely he will castle. Okay, so we are going to discuss two lines: castle and rook b1. If your opponent tries to castle, then you can play rook d8, and it's then already an equal position. Knight is pinned. White have to play knight d3, and you can simply play queen b6, and it's an equal position. A fine position for both the sides. And if your opponent tries to play rook b1, you can play queen to e5. There are three moves: queen into a2, queen to a3, or queen to e5. But I must recommend you to play queen e5. Because after knight f3 check, and after knight f3 hitting the queen, you can play queen f5 check. After queen d2, go for a queen trade, rook d8, bishop f3, c6, because the b2 pawn was attacked, b7 pawn was attacked, so c6, king e2, knight a6, rook d1, king f8. King f8 is actually very important move, so you must play it. The idea is very simple. White wants to play knight to e4 and hit your rook as well as hitting your knight. So after knight e4, if you try to capture the rook, he's first going to capture the knight on f6, and your pawn structure would get bad. That's why first play king f8. And now knight e4, capture the rook, knight into e4, bishop into e4, and now play g5. Your opponent cannot play knight d3 because f5, bishop f3, g4 is a bishop trap. So knight h5 is the best. You play bishop e6, and actually after rook d4, knight c5, the position is already better for you because you can simply play king e7 followed by rook d8, and you are better. At least you are better at least. Okay. So this was the variation. If your opponent plays e3, so this would be happening if your opponent played e3. So I think I have covered all the variations. I've covered actually majority of the variations. So if you are still having doubt, please tell me in the comment box below. I'm very happy to answer all of your questions. Okay. So for now, in these 15 to 16 minutes, I have covered all the variations, all the theory of the Budapest Gambit. So now let's check out some traps in the Budapest Gambit. Let's start. Okay. So now let's discuss some traps in the Budapest Gambit against white. Okay, so we have d4, knight f6, c4, e5. We have d into e5, and there are many players who place d5 in the position if they don't know the theory. Yeah. So many people were thinking what to do after d5. After d5, you can simply play bishop c5. After bishop c5, your position is actually, you have already equalized the position. After bishop c5, you simply want to play d6, followed by bishop f5 castle, and you are already better, already equal at least. And after bishop c5, if your opponent tries to play bishop g5, pinning up the knight, congratulations, you are winning the game. Because now comes the deadly move, knight to e4. Your opponent cannot capture the queen because bishop into f2 is a checkmate. And even if your opponent have able to see the checkmate, he is forced to play bishop e3. Or else he will, if he tries to play e3, you can simply capture the bishop on g5. So your opponent is forced to play bishop e3. Now you can simply capture the bishop on e3, f into e3, queen h4 check, g3, knight into g3, and after h into g3, you can simply capture the rook on h1, and it's already winning for black. Okay, so this was the first trap. So now let's discuss the second trap. d4, knight f6, c4, e5, pawn capture, knight g4, knight f3, knight to c6. And now we have bishop to f4. After bishop f4, definitely protecting the covering the square. Now you are going to give a check on by playing bishop b4 check, knight c3. You can simply capture the knight, and after bishop b into c3, white position is already bad. You can play queen e7, capture the pawn on e5. So your opponent will perhaps play knight to d2 if he's experienced player. Okay, so after knight d2, you can play queen e7. Idea is to capture the pawn on e5, and your opponent tries to play a3. Idea is very simple. The reason he played a3 here, your opponent is thinking that if you try to play bishop a5, he can play b4, bishop b3, he can play c5, and your bishop on b4 is trapped. Okay, so after a3, the move you are going to play is to capture the pawn on e5 with the knight. And the opponent is confused. He simply captured the bishop on b4, and congratulations. It's a one movement, knight d3, and game over. It's a checkmate. Your opponent cannot capture the knight because the pawn is pinned. So after knight into e5, if your opponent able to see this checkmate and he tries to capture the knight with the knight, you can capture the knight, and your opponent still cannot capture the bishop because it would lead towards the same checkmate. So after knight into e5, if your opponent tries to play e3, you can simply capture the knight, queen into e2, d2, and after queen into d2, this position is actually very comfortable for black. You can simply castle, you can play d6, bishop d7 followed by bishop c6, having a very nice bishop, and it's actually a very favorable position for black. Okay, so this was the second trap. So now let's discuss the third trap. We have d4, knight f6, c4, e5. After e5, we have d into e5. We have knight g4, knight f3, and now we are going to play d6. Okay, it's also a theory. After d6, definitely your opponent is going to capture the pawn because your opponent is having this isolated same pawn on the same row. So why not capturing a free pawn on d6? Bishop into d6, h3. Definitely h3 is very tempting move because your opponent would be thinking, yeah, the knight on g4 is very irritating. Let's kick the knight to the f6 square by playing h3. Congratulations, this is what you wanted. Because now comes a deadly move, knight into f2. Capturing the pawn, hitting the rook as well as the queen. Your opponent simply captured the knight. Bishop to g3 check. Boom. Simply hitting the king on f2. So your opponent is forced to capture the bishop. And now you are going to simply capture the queen on d1. You are a queen plus and you are going to win the game. Okay? So this was all the Budapest Gambit traps you can execute in your game. So now we are going to discuss a very interesting and a famous game in the Budapest Gambit so that it will help you get motivated to play this. Okay? Now come, let's discuss the game. Okay, so we have the game. So the game is between Akiba Rubinstein versus Milan Vidmar. Both the players are very strong. So the game is first of all played in 22nd April 1918. Yep, just perhaps 100 more than 100 years. 100 years before. So definitely the game is very interesting. So white starts with 1d4, black replied with knight f6, c4 e5, d into e5, we have knight g4, bishop f4, we have knight c6, knight f3, bishop to b4 check. Everything very common. I just showed you the opening. So there are two moves. White can play knight c3 or knight d2. So white chose knight to c3. And now black decided to play queen e7. You can also capture the knight on c3, but he decided to play queen e7. White defended it by playing queen d5. It's a triple protection. So now black is actually forced to play f6. Yeah, just remember the theory part I just told you. First he captured the knight. We have now b into c3 first, and now we have queen a3 first. After queen a3, now black wants to capture the pawn on c3 with a check and hitting your rook. So your opponent will try to play rook c1, developing protecting the pawn on c3, and now black decided to play f6. Yep, you have to play f6. White simply captured the pawn, knight into f6, hitting the queen. Queen went back to d2, and now we have d6 by black. White played knight to d4. We have castle by black, e3, and now black simply captured the knight on d4. So after knight into d4, what would you do in this position? How will you capture the knight on d4? Would you capture with the knight with the pawn, with this pawn or with the queen. The most natural move in the position looks to capture the pawn with the c pawn. So this was happened in the game, but much better move was to capture the pawn, capture the bishop, capture the knight with the e pawn. But also after e into d4, definitely it looks a bit scary because black rook is open. He can play rook e8 stuff like this. Bishop can come in, and definitely it's dangerous position for white. So white decided to simply capture the knight with the pawn, and now we have knight to e4, hitting the queen. Queen c2, queen a5 check, a deadly check. The queen cannot come in between because the knight is guarding the square. So white is forced to play king to e2. And now, can you find the move which black played in the position? A boom, a super move, which is. So feel free to pause the video and try to find the best move for black in the position. Okay, so all those who have found the move, bishop f5. It's the most powerful move, but not the move which was played in the game. So if you still got the bishop to f5, still get the point. But if you found rook into f, you get definitely 1 point. After rook into f4, you simply captured the piece, so definitely white have to capture the rook. And now we have bishop f5. And the idea is to play knight g3, hitting the queen, hitting the rook. So definitely the queen have to move from the c2 square. We have queen to b2, and now we have rook e8, attacking the king. King move to the f3 square. We have knight check, king g3, knight check, and now we have king h4. If white would have played this king f3, then black would have already played g5, and it's already losing for white. So that's after knight e4 check. White played king h4, and black played rook e6, bishop to e2, rook h6 check, bishop h5, rook into h5 check, king into h5, bishop g6, and after bishop g6 on the move number 25 already, white resigned the game because it's one movement. If white tries to play king g4, which is, there are two moves, king g4 and king g4, it doesn't matter what will white play. Black is simply going to play queen h5 and it's checkmate, game over for white. So this was all the theory, all the traps in the opening, and a fantastic game played by black. So I think this video must have encouraged you how to play the best reply against 1d4. So if you liked this video and this all the theory part I made it by myself, then please like the video. Please share this video with your friends who are just confused what to play against 1d4. They are not sure about it. Before I just discovered this line, I was also confused what to play because there are many stuff to play. But once I discovered this stuff, I just loved it. If you also loved this stuff, then please like the video. Please subscribe the channel so that you will always get the notification whenever I would be uploading new videos like this. Okay, so till then, stay tuned and keep watching Chess Facts.